The purpose of this video is to take a look at 4 example resumes and to look at the differences in the visual design of these resumes and some of the trade-offs of the choices in designing these resumes in different ways. So we're going to start off by looking at Lance's resume. The organization of Lance's resume, I think, is fairly typical for various resumes we see in the Writing Center. He's created this list of kind of larger categories over here on the left side and included his contact information and name at the top, and then his education, relevant coursework, leadership experience, work experience, and campus involvement, followed by accolades. So one thing that he does a little bit differently is he includes his leadership experience first before his work experience. Typically on resumes, we see work experience first, but I'm assuming that Lance made this choice because he either had more relevant leadership experience or the job to which he is applying asks specifically for applicants who were good leaders or had leadership experience. One thing that I noticed about Lance's resume is that these categories under relevant coursework are center aligned. So we can see how that center alignment creates this kind of curving line that the reader's eye has to follow, as opposed to how he's organized his leadership experiences down here, where we have this straight, more skimmable line for the reader's eyes. So typically we don't see center alignment on resumes unless it's in like the larger headings. So that's one thing I might suggest to Lance is to consider left aligning these relevant coursework categories. So let's move on to Allison's sample resume. So Allison's resume looks a good bit different than kind of the more typical design of a resume. So we can see how she's included her contact information over here on the left, but then that information is broken up a bit. So we get her name here, and then her telephone number and other contact information down here on the resume. So while this choice adds some visual interest to her resume, it certainly looks different than some other ones that maybe her employer is reviewing. It could also be kind of confusing to the employer. Sometimes students who are creating resumes in the Writing Center really shy away from these kind of variation in choices because they think it looks odd or it is less reader friendly. But it does add visual interest. A couple other things I notice about Allison's resume. If we look under her professional experience sections, her experiences are not organized as bulleted lists beginning with clear action verbs. So Lance's resume, in his resume, he does use that strategy. We can see where each of the experiences has the bulleted list beginning with the verbs direct, facilitate, and attend. And so that strategy is typically more reader friendly because we can see how in this position, Lance directs various, Lance facilitates meetings, Lance attends conferences. And in Allison's resume, I have to kind of dig for those verbs a little bit more. So here I can see she has designed, led, here worked, and then helped. But note how my eyes have to kind of jump around, and we could see that with my cursor to find those verbs. So typically we recommend this strategy of having the more skimmable list. Okay, let's move on then to Joseph's resume. So Joseph's resume actually looks like a fair amount of resumes we've seen in the Writing Center, and that he's just trying to really fit a lot into his resume. And I think that's creating this really overwhelming kind of experience as the reader of his resume. Um, so a couple of things that are standing out more specifically to me, let's look at this relevant experience section. So he is using spacing and some white space between like these different sections of relevant experience, but there's not a lot. And so for me, this whole section kind of looks like one large chunk, and I'm not sure where my eyes are supposed to go. If I was looking to try to figure out how long he held these experiences, that would be really hard for me to find, I think, because note how it's here, summer 2011, but there's not a lot of white space between that date and the rest of the text these dates are kind of hidden in that way. The other thing that stands out for me to me is there's some inconsistency here. So under business analyst, this experience has the bulleted points that begin with the action verbs, but then published author does not, it's not consistent in that same way. There's not that same formatting of the bulleted list telling me kind of where he held the position and then what he did in a consistent way. So to revise his resume, I would typically recommend that Joseph think about what information is most important for his reader and what can be either taken out or revised to be more concise, because that would give him more space to work with so that the resume wasn't kind of visually overwhelming in the way that it currently is. So last, let's take a look at Jessica Doe's resume. So this resume also has a lot of information, but I think that it's organized more effectively. It's more skimmable in that I can find these sections, the larger sections more easily, and then note how the date, if I was interested in how long Jessica held each position, it's easier to find those dates because they're separated from the rest of the resume with more white space. We can also see how this resume was created specifically for a research position. The student was applying for, I believe it was a summer like research fellowship. So she has included her research experience in her research conference experience before her work experience. So again, typically we would see work experience first, um, but Jessica has made an appropriate choice to focus on her research experiences earlier, because that's more applicable to her audience. That's what they're likely to be looking for is an applicant with research experience.